Welcome to this Warsaw Zoo, owned by Jan and Antonina Zookeepers. Here is the home of many exotic animals that they have collected over the years. Both the Jan and Antonina are extremely passionate about their animals and have spent their entire lives searching for different types of animals. Here you'll see the tiger. It's just one example of the various exotic animals owned by Jan and Antonina. The story we will tell you about today takes place during World War II, around the time of the invasion of Poland. Both Jan and Antonina had never expected such traumatic events to occur. They were proud of their animals and their zoo. Countless people would come to visit and take interviews, photos with the tigers. People from all over the world wanted to come to Warsaw Zoo. Unfortunately, upon the time of the invasion of Poland, this zoo no longer exists.
My name is Antonina. I have always felt like I have a strong connection with animals. It's almost like I can look into their eyes and see what they're feeling and what I need to do to care for them, and it's my passion to do so. I think that in today's society, we should be connecting more with animals. And I believe that they long for human company and that humans also need animals too. It's like a symbiotic relationship. They search for attention from animals, and by giving them the attention, we can have a great relationship. I love animals so much that I named my son after one of my favorite ones, the lynx. I named my son Rice, which is lynx in Polish. And I was very concerned over World War II, during the time of World War II, because I was a child of war myself, and I saw the negative effects that it had on me. I lost both of my parents, and it was very devastating. So I was really worried about my son, Rice, growing up in such turmoil. I always wanted to protect him and make sure that he was not affected the way that I was. Right. So because my parents had died in a war, I felt like I would do anything to avoid another one, and I think that created a false sense of optimism. We never really thought that the war would come to us in Poland, because we all assumed that since we had an alliance with France, that no country would want to mess with us because of the alliance. So when it did come, it was very quick and tragic. I remember, like, in one particular instance, I had to hide in a lampshade store because it was supposedly on a safer side of town, and I was really scared. All I can remember was I just kept hearing these bombings. I was really scared that one of them would hit us, and I had my only son with me, and it was extremely nerve-wracking being there. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. After I hid in the lampshade store, I decided that I had to return to the zoo to check on the animals. And I was really scared, but I left Rice at the store, and I crossed town. And when I got back to the zoo, I saw that it had been partially bombed, which was really devastating. I saw a lot of dead, precious animals. I saw a lot of animals that had died and had been, it was just a really gruesome sight, because they had all been hit by these bombs. It was really devastating because the zoo was our livelihood and it's what our son grew up in, or was supposed to grow up in, and to see it all like destroyed like that was devastating.
I think this zoo would eventually become a safe haven to countless people during the World War II. The combined personalities of Antonina, with her caring spirit and charming personality and devotion to the animals, as well as later the Jews, and Jan's daring, strategic skills and daring tactics that get them to become so successful during these times of war.
I personally felt a moral indebtedness to the Jews my entire life. My father and I had lived around Jews, and I considered them like any other people. In fact, actually, I know so many friends and families who've done so much for me that I felt that at this time I was required to repay those debts. I was a big part of the underground resistance. It started with just small things like when our zoo ended up being taken away and brought down. Myself and Antonina suggested that we create a pig farm, in which gave us a reason behind keeping ourselves alive and staying in that area, in which we housed the Jews. The pig farm was our facade, if you will, where we still did, in fact, have a pig farm, and were giving the meat to the Germans, but then also giving scraps to the Jews. So although I did know that Jews don't usually have that in their diet, they were very thankful to me to have anything at all when it came to the scraps that I offered when I visited the ghetto. I was a major contributor to the underground resistance. The zoo was sort of a meeting point for everybody. Antonina and I ended up inviting a lot of our family members and a lot of friends in order to fill the household with a bunch of random vases, so that the military guards, which were always close to the zoo as they had their own facility very close to our zoo, they were often passing by and thus wouldn't be so shocked to find another unfamiliar face. I was also part of sneaking in explosives, as well as poisoning some of the military guards with some rotten pig food. I knew that the Germans only saw us Polish as simple, stupid-minded people. They never believed that we would ever dare to do something so dangerous in such an open place like the zoo, especially now that some of our houses were open. There were just plenty of open space in between these areas, yet they never figured out a thing. I sort of enjoyed this daring adventures in which I was assured that although it might have been risky, I knew that I wanted to help the Jews as much as I could, and I also was worried that my family and I would end up getting found out, but we were extremely careful in everything that we did.
While Jan worked for the underground resistance, I stayed at the zoo and made sure that everything was running smoothly, that the soldiers were not getting any hints, and one thing that we did to protect ourselves was nickname each person that we were harboring so that they sounded like an animal's name. So we would call someone by their nickname so that if a soldier overheard us, they would think that we were referring to an animal that we were taking care of. One way that I was able to interact with the soldiers was to treat them as if they were an animal that I had previously cared for. Like I said before, I kind of have a connection with them. I can empathize with them, which makes animals trust me. It makes them kind of see me as a friend, which is what I did with the soldiers. I would kind of build this invisible bridge mentally with them so that they were able to trust me and think that I was telling them the truth.
You know, caring for and making sure that the Jews, as well as the rest of the family and every single member that we would invite in order to keep up this facade, she was constantly providing food and shelter and everything for these families, and it was a lot that revolved around the home chores while I was out and doing the more physical stuff involving, interventions and other ways of stopping the military. One other tactic that we also had was notifying the Jews that a random stranger was at the door with a specific code.
We played Go Go to Crete, the song on the piano, which would then be the signal for them to hide.
I believe that animals, just like people, should be purebred.
Humans should reflect the perfection of the Aryan race. I have been going all over Poland in many different zoos looking for animals that can be used to build my collection, and I will breed these animals in order to create a perfect specimen, the strongest, the best animals. I met Antonina and Jan a long time ago because we have both worked in the zoo, and I have come to borrow their animals from them so that I may continue my experiments.
Heck came to Jan and I after the bombing of our zoo, and he basically said that he would take the rest of our animals and keep them safe in his zoo in Germany. At first, I was very skeptical. I was afraid to let my animals go with him. He was a Nazi, but I felt like I had to trust him. It might help to have an ally who is a Nazi, and also I really didn't have anything else that I could do to save my animals in Warsaw. We had met a long time ago because we were both zookeepers, and I thought that because we both shared the same interests and passions that he would be on our side and that he would help us. So that's why I felt like I could, at the time being, I could trust him. He was always nice to me. I think at one point he had feelings for me, so I just thought that he would be able to help us in the end. Unfortunately, we were really wrong. He turned out to be a big liar. I think that his just desire to create perfectionism in a specimen with the Darwinism and Nazism, it really kind of clouded his morals, and he did experiments on animals, and I think his cruelty was shown at a New Year's Eve party that he had where he shot animals for spectators, and it was really gruesome and brutal.
So I remember when I was young that I didn't really know what was going on at the beginning of the war. War, to me, I didn't know what that was. To me, when my older friends came and talked about the warships and the warplanes, to me those were just toys. They never really meant any harm to me. One night when Heck had his New Year's Eve party and I heard the gunshots and I asked my mother what those gunshots meant, she couldn't answer me. She just looked at me with the same shocked expression on her.
Mom, what does it mean? Who's shooting?
I really think that war became real to me when my father, who had raised a pig farm, gave me a piglet as a pet so that I could be distracted from the war and I guess have an innocent life during the war. However, one day I ran out to the garden like any kid would, and we bumped into a German soldier, Morris, who had known humans to be these kind beings, didn't know better, went up to him. The soldier saw him and then brutally took him away from me. Ever since that moment, I feel like it was my first step into really realizing that this is real, this is going to affect me, and anybody can hurt me. Because if they were able to hurt this innocent little piglet, what was to stop them from hurting me? Growing up, I guess these animals were a distraction to me. These animals gave me a couple of hours of, I guess, peace during the chaotic time. My father's ideals of the personality of animals was like that these animals can and will act like humans just as humans will act like animals. It all just depends how you raise, educate these animals. Like I had a rabbit and who knew that that rabbit could learn to kiss a human, open doors, or give us reminders about when dinner time was. These characteristics were very much human, but they were being expressed by a rabbit. So even though some of these animals were taken away from me, I understood really deeply that these animals had a human connection to me.
There was a lot of craziness going on in Warsaw and around the zoo. I was really, really thankful that we could kind of stay in our own enclosed area. I like to say that it was like the house under the crazy star because we had animals to distract my son. We were all a community living kind of in our own, almost like an island among like war and turmoil. And throughout the war, it was definitely frightening. I had my daughter Teresa, and she was just a baby. Jan was not at home. He was fighting, and which worried me even more. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. It was a really terrible time in my life. Then one day, I think the worst thing that could have happened happened. A bunch of German soldiers came into the cabin and started yelling at us. I was afraid that they had discovered what we'd been doing, and they said, oh, we'll get you, you're gonna die. They just kept shouting at us, and they took my son Bryce and they pulled him away from me, and they took him behind the shed, and I heard a gunshot. And my heart sank. It was the worst moment of my life. But then suddenly, I saw my son walk around the corner with a dead chicken, and the soldier said, oh, we pulled off such a good joke. And they all started laughing. It was just one big joke. I mean, it was like the worst joke that you could, I would not wish it on anyone else to be pranked like that. It was so awful, and my son was just terrified because he thought that he was going to die, and I'm thankful that none of us were killed, but still it was a moment that is so traumatizing and you just can't get over it.
Come out. Move that way. Right here. We're gonna kill you. You're first. No. Just kidding.
What? It was a joke?
Yeah.
I could not believe that we actually had survived the war and the uprising after all that had happened, after all the fighting. Jan returned home safely. He knocked on the door, and I saw him, and I hugged him, and I kissed him because I was just so thankful and shocked that he was able to make it back to us. And after Jan returned, that's when we could start rebuilding our lives. So after the war, Jan was offered a job to be director of the zoo, and we did that for 2 years. But afterwards, it just wasn't working out. We felt that we had to write. Well, maybe I won't go too far into that. We did that for 2 years, but since then, I've been writing autobiographies. I've been writing children's stories, just kind of getting my perspective out there and telling my stories.
It was at this time that it was towards the height of the uprising. I had left home to go to war, and I could tell it was a very hard time for my family. It was an even harder time for me. I mean, I can't even express the conditions I was in were very, very, I was struggling, to say the least. It was nerve-wracking and tiring and gruesome, but we persevered, and I knew what we were trying to get through in the end. And it was a hard battle, but in the end we did come out on top, and the Germans were taken over. When I did return home, I was so relieved to come home to my family and know that they were all safe and nothing had happened to them either. We ended up reopening the zoo for 2 years as I was promoted to director. But after that, I retired and decided that I would still continue my passion for animals and zoology, but with more experimental studies and not so much taking over the difficulties of remaking a zoo and everything. But yes, both Antonina and I still believe strongly in animals and still kept that as a big part of our lives.
So by the end of the war, I was pretty much, I guess you could say, all grown up. During the beginning, when we had all these guests over in our house, the biggest enemy was myself, because I knew that at any moment, one wrong word, one wrong look could just lead to my family being dead. So, at the beginning of the war, I was super nervous, always looking nervous, which was a dead giveaway right away. But, as the war dragged on, I became, I guess you could say, colder. I knew how to control myself. I cared for people. But, occasionally I would snap at my mom for treating me like a child, because I knew everything that was going on. And the older I got, I guess, internally, like, people still saw me as a child, that I would get so upset that people would treat me like a kid. But deep inside, I knew that I was all grown up. I knew what was going on. I knew everything, basically, and being treated like a child was just so aggravating to me.
This story was very important to me, and I felt like it needed to be said. I wrote this book with the intention of really getting across the emotions of each of the characters, as I hope you were able to see in each of the interviews, as well as writing the book in a narrative to make it more relatable and a little more understandable. I tried to use more simple language to make it, easy to comprehend for each of the readers. I also thought it was important to use a lot of descriptive words when describing the zoo and the animals and all of their feelings throughout this whole time. I wanted to avoid making it like every other war story during this time. Yes, it was during the invasion of Poland, and around this time with the Jews, and they were housing Jews at this time. But I wanted to take it back a little from that and focus on what's really important to Antonina and Jan, and that was the connection between the animals. And in relation to that, their deep passion just for humans in general, as well as the animals, which I feel was then passed down on to Rice. I also noticed that in those deep connections with the animals, Antonina often compared herself to the animals. For example, in the lampshade scene which you saw, she compares herself to a lioness. This just proves her theory, in which she believes that humans and animals are one and the same, and how much brighter the story can become with the interaction of these animals. I also tried my best to maintain the truthfulness of the story and refer to Antonina's autobiographies and her memoirs and her journals, as well as speaking with Rice and getting as much as a raw, real story as I could. You will see also the pictures that we have from the actual zoo, as well as the animals in which they interacted with. Overall, I am myself satisfied with this book, and feel that I've done my best in truly representing the time for the Zabinski family